Good afternoon and welcome into another edition of Crunch Time here on Amateur Sports TV, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, anywhere you can hear us. We are live. We got a great show for you today. I am Michael Wags, Wagon Connect, joined alongside by Joe Hamilton, and Scott Tobin is with us. We're having some technical difficulties getting him to hear us, but you may hear his disembodied voice at some points throughout today as we bring him in to talk with our very, very special guest coming up here in just a moment. But first off, Joe, how are you doing after that big Blues win last night? And are you getting ready for Super Bowl week?
I'm getting ready for Super Bowl week, and I think the Chiefs, they look good going into this. So does the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So it's going to be a good game.
It's going to be an absolutely awesome game, at least I think it will be. And somebody that has a little bit more knowledge about these sorts of things and has covered his fair share of Super Bowls, I'm sure. We're joined by, in our minds, in our estimation, an NFL legend in Mr. Howard Balzer. Mr. Balzer, thank you so much for taking the time out today to join us and talk about football.
Hey, it's a pleasure being with you guys. I'm sure it'll be almost as fun as Super Bowl week.
Well, it's not the usual Super Bowl week that we're used to for sure. It's going to look a lot different. Obviously, Media Day is going to be more like this than anything else. But just give us a little bit of background, first off, for those that may not know enough about you, a little bit about yourself and your connection to St. Louis and football in general.
Well, first, if it was a regular Super Bowl week, I would be there, and I'm not. And so that's been kind of strange in itself because I'd only missed one previous Super Bowl since 1980. And that was, ironically enough, in Tampa 30 years ago, where I was down there for a couple of days during the week, but wasn't at the actual game. So obviously it's very different. But yeah, my connection to St. Louis, and I grew up back east and came to St. Louis, hard to believe, 43 years ago in 1978 to work for the Sporting News. And when I came to the Sporting News, it was to work on their statistical books. But within about a year or so, I was helping them cover the NFL, which, of course, Sporting News was the baseball Bible back then. And I had suggested they should do more covering of the NFL. And so I became very involved with that, of course. And I was on the first broadcast and then the first 9 broadcasts of the ESPN NFL draft. The first one was in 1980. And I was a part of that first draft, and of course we could take up the whole show talking about all the things that I've done in St. Louis, radio-wise, and all that over the years. But still have fond. I don't know if I guess I can call it memories now because I'm living in Arizona, relocated here in September. But as you can see, I'm sporting the Battlehawks cap. From their short abbreviated season from last year, but hopefully the XFL will be back next year in 2022, and those crazy fans will be filling up the dome again in about a year.
Yeah, that's the big hope, and we were definitely jumping on the Battlehawk bandwagon because we love football here in St. Louis. It doesn't really get as widely pushed out there as I think it should. And obviously, Stan Kroenke didn't do us any favors as well. But we'll talk about that a little bit later.
Yeah. You got a whole show?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. We've got a whole week if we really want to.
It's funny. Every time that does come up very quickly, I always channel Billy Crystal from the old movie. I think it was called Mr. Saturday Night, where he played an aging comic in the Catskills, and every now and then, very oftentimes in the movie, he would say, "Hey, don't get me started," and that's whenever anybody asks me about the Rams leaving, I always say that, "Don't get me started," because, like you said, what a crazy time and all of that was. But it's somewhat timely because here's the Rams again, making news, trying to. Make news when everyone wants to talk about the Super Bowl. And I was going to go back and look how many trades the Rams made to improve their team let's just say in the last 5 years before they left St. Louis, compared to the trades and all the things they've done in the 5 years they've been there. Because it's crazy. It's crazy. But they're all about making splash moves in Los Angeles, falling in and out of love with players and all those things. So it's kind of interesting the way that they're doing things now. When they were here at the end, it was just all about the move. They didn't care about improving the football team.
Well, yeah, it's very true. And you look at the amount of first-round picks they've given away in the last couple of years. I mean, they don't have a first-round pick until after 2023. The last first-round pick they just traded away in Jared Goff. It just makes you sit there and question, really, what the hell is going on in Los Angeles? We saw a lot of that here in St. Louis, but it seems to be continuing out there as well.
Yeah, no, it is. And when you look at just what now remember, they made the trade for Jared Goff within a couple of months after the move was approved in 2016. They made that deal before the draft had even begun. And I was just looking at that. I got to look at my sheet here. I was just looking at that today. They to trade up to the first overall pick, the Rams gave Tennessee their own first round pick, 2 second-round picks, a third-round pick in that draft, and then in the next year, a first and a third-round pick. So that's all they traded for Jared Goff.
Wow.
Then they get pretty good play from him and like him enough to give him a contract extension. And then all of a sudden, they don't have as good players around him. They don't have the running game that they had. And when Todd Gurley was healthy, now all of a sudden, Sean McVay says, I need a new toy. So let's get Matthew Stafford and let's give up more number 1 picks. It's kind of bizarre, just the way they're doing things there.
Well, and you talk about Matthew Stafford. He's basically coming from a team that had no running game and a bunch of off-injured kind of receivers, and now he's going to the Rams that has no running game and some kind of off-injured and receivers. I mean, Cooper Kupp is good. You've got some other guys there, but the injury history is there as well. I mean, are the Rams going to be any better with Stafford there? I mean, he's a gamer for sure, but it might be more of the same.
It very well might be. And I've heard a lot of the analysis in the last 24 hours, and they're all saying, well, the offense that Sean McVay ran with Jared Goff was tailored to what he does best with some rollouts and play action and all that. And he wants a guy to be able to go downfield. And so that's why you got Stafford. Well, who are you going to go downfield to? I mean, Cooper Kupp is a good player. Robert Woods is a good player, but they're not really down the field threats that are going to stretch a defense. And so, and the other part of it is the best moves the Rams made the year after they got Jared Goff, after that first year. The best moves they made was upgrading the offensive line. And they signed Andrew Whitworth as a free agent. They signed John Sullivan for a free agent. And in 2017 and 2018, none of their 5 offensive linemen missed a start in 2 complete seasons, except, I will do a caveat, except for the last game of the 2017 season when the Rams already had their playoff spot clinched and they couldn't change anything in the final game. And so they rested a bunch of those guys. So aside from that, they didn't miss a start. And then what happened, the year before, last year? Well, John Sullivan retired. Roger Saffold left as a free agent. They plugged in a bunch of young guys in the line who got injured. And, of course, we had the Gurley situation, and the team wasn't as good. It just wasn't as good because the line wasn't as good. This year, the line was a little bit better than last year, but they still had to beat the Cardinals in the last game of the regular season. Otherwise, they wouldn't have even been in the playoffs this year. So the issues they had went well beyond, I believe, who the quarterback was. Now, it looks like they do have a running. You mentioned not running game. It looks like they might have a guy to build around in Cam Akers. We'll see about that. That could be a good second-round pick. But it's just, like I said, the most important thing with that team was that offensive line that enabled them to do what they did in those 2 very successful years, including the one they got to the Super Bowl. And heck, if you go back to the greatest show days, they had Kurt Warner and they had Isaac Bruce and they had Torrey Holt and Orlando Pace and Marshall Faulk, great skill players. But without the offensive line that they had, that team wouldn't have been as good as it was. And in fact, I did this stat once. In the 3 years of the greatest show, in those 3 seasons, their starting offensive line, this is 99, 2000, and 2001, their starting offensive line, that line that started the season, missed a combined 7 starts in 3 years. 3 years. Then after that, Pace started getting hurt and things started changing and they weren't as good. So you better have that offensive line. And it's always funny to me, guys, because I use a term called collective amnesia. All through the offseason, everybody talks about, we need whatever team it is, fill in the blank. Well, we have to improve our offensive line. This line has to be better. Then when you get to the season and the team isn't playing well on offense, does anybody talk about the line? No. They say, the quarterback, he's not good enough. The play caller isn't creative enough. All these other issues, and no one even talks about the offensive line. It's like they forgot about it. And so, but that's the key. That's the bread and butter of any team. If you want to be good on offense, is having an offensive line. And I'll tell you, it bit the Packers in that NFC Championship game because they had lost David Bakhtiari, their left tackle, and their tackle could not block Shaq Barrett and Jason Pierre-Paul, who combined for 5 sacks of Aaron Rodgers in that game, including, this is great, after the two of the interceptions of Tom Brady, the anointed one, the GOAT, the guy who never makes a mistake, 3 interceptions in the second half. But after the last 2 interceptions, the Packers went 3 and out on 2 successive possessions. I didn't hear anybody write about that after the game. And there was a sack on each of those possessions. And that was as much of a reason why the Packers lost as anything else that anybody was talking about after the game.
Oh, you did not make Joe very happy. He's a Packers fan.
No, I'm a Packer fan. I mean, I've always been a Packer fan outside of the Rams when they were here. But, speaking of this matchup and Tom Brady back there for the 100th time, it seems, you have old GOAT versus new GOAT in my mind. I mean, you're talking a quarterback who can make any throw on the field, has abundance of weapons in Patrick Mahomes. How do you characterize this matchup, man? Because this is going to be some must-see television.
It definitely should be. And I'll say this, just the point I was just making about the offensive line is that, and the great thing about Mahomes is that he just has such a great instinct, such great field awareness that a lot of times when that pass rush is coming, he knows early enough to try to avoid it. And then he always has Travis Kelce to find on the field if he's in a little bit of trouble. And I think they're going to have to do a lot of that because that matchup, the Chiefs aren't going to have their starting tackles. They haven't had their right tackle, Mitchell Schwartz, for several weeks, a while actually. And then Eric Fisher, their left tackle, tore his Achilles in the AFC Championship game. So they're going to have 2 backup tackles in the game trying to block those 2 guys on the Bucs that I just talked about. And that who knows? That could end up being a huge aspect of that game. And I've said this to a few people in the last week or so, and I'm sure I'll say it more this week, is that as great as these quarterbacks are, and with all the offensive weapons that both teams have, it will who wins will probably come down to which offensive line plays better, and of course against the defense. Which defense might come up with a key stop or maybe a key takeaway or whatever it might be. I think that could will end up being the difference in what should be a very fun game to watch.
And I think both of these defenses kind of get overlooked in a sense as well. I mean, Kansas City a few years ago, you were very questionable on what they were going to provide defensively. And then Tampa really just gets overlooked considering they have to be, balanced against, the early 2000s Bucs that we saw face off against St. Louis in that NFC Championship game. Give us one guy from either of those defenses that would be an impact player and someone that could, maybe change the game on Sunday.
Well, I mentioned the 2 guys in the Bucs, certainly with Barrett and Jason Pierre-Paul. The other key for them will be their secondary, which got torched at least early in the game when they played the Chiefs earlier this season. They had a lot of young defensive backs in there. They all now have experience. You saw that Sean Murphy Bunting, who can count how many names he has, but he's had an interception, I think, in every in several games in a row, and he had one in that game against the Packers. So those defensive backs will be key, along with someone trying to stay with Travis Kelce, which is really, really, really difficult. On the Chiefs side, I would say that a difference, if you can get Tom Brady off his mark. And I think a couple of those interceptions were because the Packers got some pressure on him. If you can do that with a guy like Frank Clark, is one. Chris Jones in the middle of that line can be a difference maker and stop that running game, which has really helped the Bucs down the stretch. Leonard Fournette looks like a rejuvenated player and has been a big part of what Tampa Bay has done at the end of the season. And then you have Tyrann Mathieu, who's their leader on defense, can make big plays a lot of the time. So you're right. Both these defenses are pretty good. And the Chiefs, I know this makes St. Louis fans totally upset when you bring up the name Steve Spagnuolo, but the guy can simply coach defense. There's absolutely no doubt about that. He did it with the Giants. And isn't this interesting that when the Giants beat the Buccaneers, when not the Patriots, when they were undefeated, it wasn't Eli Manning in the offense that won that game, even though they had a couple big plays, obviously. But the defense shut down the Patriots with Spagnuolo's defense in that game. Then last year, they did an excellent job on San Francisco because that Spagnuolo's defense a lot of times takes time for everybody to get comfortable with it. They were a lot better down the stretch last year than they had been earlier in the year. Now they've picked up from there, and they're still playing very, very solid defense. So they're certainly going to be challenged against the Buccaneers because of all their offensive weapons. But they are very good on defense too.
Scott, if you can hear me, we've been talking about key players on both sides of the ball. I know you got some questions about the game on Sunday. Go ahead and lay one out there if you can hear me. If you can't, I'll move on to Joe. But if you can, pop a question out. I don't think you can hear me. All right, Joe, go ahead and let's continue down this pathway of the Super Bowl. You had a couple other questions that you wanted to get out there as well. Now,
I want to make comparisons to this Chiefs team to the greatest show on turf. Can you? I mean, it's so many weapons on those greatest show on turf teams to this generation's Chiefs teams. Can you make that comparison? Is that fair?
You can in terms of the production. And so, but when you look at the number, I mean, the Chiefs don't have a Marshall Faulk. They have Travis Kelce, and the Rams did not have a high caliber tight end on that team. They had some tight ends who made some plays from time to time because everybody was paying attention to everybody else. Tyreek Hill, it's hard to compare because he's just a different player, but you can certainly say he's as dangerous, maybe even a little more dangerous at times than Isaac Bruce or Torrey Holt. But those two guys, Isaac Bruce is in the Hall of Fame. Torrey Holt's been a finalist. And probably Tyreek Hill, if he keeps this up, and Kelce will probably be Hall of Fame consideration. But they don't have some of those other guys. The offensive line isn't as good, but they still play well together. There's no even with the tackles I mentioned that the Chiefs have lost, there's no Orlando Pace on that line, and there's no Adam Timmerman for that matter. Timmerman was a heck of an offensive lineman. But in terms of today's game and what they are able to accomplish, I mean, Mahomes, as great as Kurt Warner was, the one thing that Mahomes can do, obviously, is he can move, he can be mobile, he throws on the run. Just when you least expect it, he's thrown it to a guy that no one was even thinking might have been open. And so he's a generational player, obviously. But, all those guys on the Rams, except for Torrey, and he will be in there within the next couple of years, they're all Hall of Famers. And that's pretty singular. And we won't now, like I said, Kelce, Mahomes most likely, and Hill, if he keeps it up, they could be Hall of Famers, but they won't have 5. I can pretty much guarantee that.
Well, we were going to touch on the Hall of Fame in a little bit, but since you brought it up, I do want to kind of get your thoughts on that because I think you were a part of the committee that was trying to get Torrey Holt into the Hall of Fame as well. Yes. Isaac did just get in. Does that hurt his chances over the next couple of years, considering who's also eligible? And then what does that process look like? How many people are in the room? What's the pitch like? I mean, we're not in there, so we don't know what it's like. Right. But give us your insight about how that goes.
It's one of my favorite, and I'm glad you asked, because it's one of my favorite things to talk about because it is such a unique process. And I've been a part of it now. I've almost lost count. I believe it's 17 or 18 years. And Bernie Miklasz was the St. Louis representative for many years. And so when Kurt Warner came up, Orlando Pace came up, even Aeneas Williams, Roger Worley back in the day, he made the initial presentation. And then I would pipe in with things that he didn't say. Bernie went off the committee a few years ago, and I stayed on it. So I picked up with Isaac Bruce I'm trying to remember if I did 2 or 3 presentations and got him in last year. Torrey, I don't think Torrey hurts, because what hurt the Rams, because I've always thought that Isaac should have been in earlier, and he should have been a finalist earlier than he was. Same with Torrey. The problem was in 2015, Pace, Warner, Holt, and Bruce all became eligible for the first time the same year. And when you have that, they all were semifinalists, which is the top 25. But once you get to that next cut, all 4 of them aren't going to get enough votes to move on. And so the first year, I'm pretty sure the first year, Pace and Warner were both finalists. What also hurt the other guys is that Pace didn't get in as a first-time eligible, which to me was absolutely ridiculous. I mean, Jonathan Ogden got in his first year. Walter Jones got in his first year, but not Orlando Pace. Are you kidding me? So that pushed Kurt Warner back a year, because the next year, Orlando got in, and Isaac or Torrey were not finalists. Then the next year, if I'm not mistaken, when it was just Kurt, Isaac made it into the room as a finalist. And then Kurt got in. Then it was just Isaac, I'm pretty sure, for another 2 years. And then last year, I was a little surprised, quite frankly, that Torrey was a finalist last year, because I thought that wouldn't happen until Isaac ended up getting in. And so being now the person who represents St. Louis, the former Rams, even though, believe it or not, I'm listed on the list as the Los Angeles Rams representative. I'm actually listed under Los Angeles, which makes me cringe a little bit. But what are you going to do? At first, I was just an at-large guy, and they couldn't find anybody for Los Angeles. And the main reason for that, is a little background, is that they wanted Sam Farmer. A lot of people probably know of Sam. He's worked for the Los Angeles Times for decades, and has covered the NFL all that time. Well, the LA Times has a policy that none, and I say none in capital letters, none of their writers are able to vote on any awards in any sport. So they can't, baseball guys can't vote for Cy Young, can't vote for MVP, can't vote for anything, and of course can't be on the Hall of Fame selection board. So other than that, the Hall of Fame didn't think there was anybody worthy of being the Los Angeles Rams representative. So they flipped me from at large to Los Angeles Rams. So I had to make both presentations last year. Then Isaac, of course, got in, had to make the Torrey presentation. That meeting has happened already, just like, and then it was on Zoom 2 weeks ago, Tuesday. Usually we vote the day before the Super Bowl, all in person, but that's not happening this year, obviously. So we did it all on Zoom, which went a lot better than all of us thought. But the process is fascinating, because like I said, one person makes a presentation for the player in their area. It lasts about 5 to 7 minutes. Then it goes open to the floor for further discussion, and you just go through the whole list. And we were on that Zoom call, guys, for 8 hours and 45 minutes. That's how long we were. I was sitting in this chair right here at this desk on Zoom. But I've always said this. It's humbling to be a part of it, to try to help guys get in. And it does get a little old after a while. I mean, I will never say that it's about me or anything, but I was so happy, not only for Isaac and his family when he got in last year, but it was like pressure off my shoulder. It was a relief that he got in, because now I didn't have to do another presentation for him. You know, a guy I know pretty well in Tampa, Ira Kaufman, 2 weeks ago Tuesday, he made a presentation for the 8th consecutive year for John Lynch.
Oh, man.
And I'm sure he's going, come on, guys. How many more years are you going to make me do this? I mean, if you're saying he's good to be a finalist, at some point he's got to get enough votes to get in. Now, whether he did this year or not, we don't know. But I'm hopeful for Ira that he got in. He can move on to more concentrate on Rondé Barber. But like I said, the process, the one interesting part of the process, and I think a lot of people don't understand it, and they have this perception that we just all vote off the top of our head. And if we like a guy, we vote for him. If we don't like him, he's not going to get our votes. And there's all these personal prejudices. In fact, I heard someone writing I saw Mike Florio, he just writes off some planet somewhere sometimes, saying how Phillip Rivers, this is before he announced he was going to coach high school football. He said he will be helped if he goes into the media, because if he goes into the media, is on TV, that will help when he comes up for Hall of Fame consideration. And I'm saying, no. Now, yeah, it keeps you in the public eye, but it doesn't change your credentials to be in the Hall of Fame. I know I don't consider that at all. And I truly doubt that any of the other 47 selectors believe that. But those are some of the, I think, misconceptions that are out there. And they don't realize how many people we all talk to. Like you're in the media. How much would you guys really know? Well, the reality is we talk to people. When I present Torrey Holt, I don't just talk off the top of my head, or Isaac Bruce. I talk to players, former players. I talk to former coaches. We all do. There's one guy on the committee who does a poll of personnel people every year and has them give me your top 5 from this class, and then talks to them about them and compiles the votes. So there's a lot of work and a lot of time that goes into it. And one part of the process that in the committee that I've really liked is that in the last few years, the Hall has added Hall of Famers to the voting committee as long as you're in the media. And so about 4 or 5 years ago, they added James Lofton and Dan Fouts. Then this year they added Tony Dungy and Bill Polian. And those guys during the conversation and during those discussions are incredible resources to hear their takes on players and what they think from a perspective of as a player, as a coach, as a GM like Bill Polian. So it's, like I said, it's humbling to be a part of that. We all know how much this changes lives when somebody gets elected to the Hall of Fame. And the one last thing, I know I've gone on here for a bit, but
you're fine.
The one thing I always say, and this kind of drives me a little crazy, but I understand it's kind of the way of the world. Because I've always said, you take those 15 finalists and come up with any combination of 5 that you can come up with. And that would be a hell of a class. Now, we also know there's going to be guys who are first-time eligibles getting in, like Peyton Manning, like Charles Woodson. This year, Torrey's candidacy, along with Reggie Wayne, was affected by the fact that Calvin Johnson became a first-time eligible. I'm not sure if he got in or not, but I would say there's probably a pretty good chance. And anytime that happens, if you get 2 or 3 first-time eligible guys, that only leaves 2 or 3 other spots, and of 12 or 13 other guys. But the one thing then I always say is, we don't vote against people. They take it, you don't like that guy, you voted against. No, I didn't vote against him. I voted for other guys. Those are the ones that I felt, in my opinion, were deserving that year. And there's other people who vote differently. There's times when I vote for a guy to get to the 15 who isn't in it. When it goes from 15 to 10, there's a player or two who's not in the 10 that I voted for. Doesn't mean the other guys are right or wrong, or I'm right or wrong. It's just what the group voted on. And so it just kind of makes me cringe when I hear people say, oh, they must, if we had something against a guy, they wouldn't even make the 15. I mean, that's hard to be in the final 15. And so when you've done that, you've had a hell of a career. And the reality is, most players who get to the final 15 at some point are elected to the Hall. One last stat I'll give you, and I looked this up. I figured this out a couple of years ago, and might have changed a little bit, but I was curious because I asked people, I'll ask you guys, how many years do you think Lynn Swann had to wait to get into the Pro Football Hall of Fame as a finalist?
Oh, gosh.
Shoot.
I would say probably in the 8 to 9 year range.
A lot of people
I'd say about 10.
10, 14.
Wow.
14 years. And he was hurt because in a lot of those years, his teammate, John Stallworth, was also a finalist. And so, and what happens there a lot of times, it splits votes. there's only 48 in the committee. Back then, there were even less. So some people vote for one, some people vote for another, and neither have enough votes to move on. Finally, the year that Swan went in, obviously he went in. The next year, Stallworth went in. So those are the things and the little nuances that affect it all. But we vote for somebody, not against someone. And even in the controversy over Terrell Owens, I mean, it was a crime that he had to wait till his third year. Well, like I said, Lynn Swan waited till his 13th. John Stallworth, I think, was 9. Marvin Harrison was his 3rd. I mean, a lot of guys have to wait. So the thing I figured out, I went through all the Hall of Famers, players, and the average wait, not including first-time guys, because I took them out of the equation, the average wait for guys who did not get in as first-time eligibles was 7 years.
Wow.
That was the average. So it just gives a little perspective on the process and why things happen the way they do.
Yeah, that's absolutely needed.
It truly does. Now let's talk about a future Hall of Famer in Tom Brady. Talk about.
You think so? You think so?
Obviously. I mean, come on now. But no. Talk about the type of pressure he's under, leading a team in the first ever home Super Bowl. Talk about the amount of pressure he's under.
Well, I think that these guys are accustomed to pressure. And he's been, I mean, heck, I thought you were going to ask the pressure he was under leaving New England after being comfortable there, obviously, for so long and having so much success and going to a new team. Now, a big part of why he picked that team is he respected the offensive system of Bruce Arians, and he also knew he had a great supporting cast. And so that was a big reason why he picked it. But that still doesn't guarantee anything. And heck, at one point they were 7-5, and you wondered, well, how's this going to all end up? And then they won their last 4 games. But yeah, there's a certain amount, of pressure there. But hey, with the Chiefs, haven't been many teams that have won 2 Super Bowls in a row. So I think it's there for all. They know getting to this level is difficult, and so they're all accustomed to it. And I think one of the things that some people forget, and we'll never know what would have happened, but in that AFC Championship game 2 years ago against New England, if Dee Ford doesn't jump offside, and the Chiefs win that game, now if they had gone to that Super Bowl, you don't know if they would have won. Would they have then made it last? You can never say that. Well, they would have been there 3 years in a row, because you never know. But this is pretty incredible what the Chiefs have achieved. And the guy I'm happiest for, quite honestly, is Andy Reid, because until he won I just did what I always say you shouldn't do, because I hate it when someone says he won or he lost, as if they're the only person there, especially the quarterback. But when Reid was the head coach of that winning Super Bowl team, I was glad for him, because people were wondering, well, he hasn't won a Super Bowl, and he hasn't done this and he hasn't done that. Is he really that great a head coach? I'm saying, come on. All the guy has done is won. And all I look is the Philadelphia Eagles. I mean, they fired this guy. Isn't that pretty amazing that in a decade's time, the Eagles have fired 2 head coaches that have won Super Bowls? Now, granted, the Eagles didn't win one when Reid was there, but he was still darn successful. Had one difficult year. Okay, we're moving on. And of course, they made the great decision to hire Chip Kelly. That was a pretty good one. And so now they win a Super Bowl with Doug Peterson a few years ago. Tough year, lose almost their entire offensive line to injury. And there again, everyone's blaming Carson Wentz. They couldn't protect him. They couldn't protect him. They had nobody playing on that offensive line except for Jason Kelce. And so, tough year. Oh, it's all Wentz's fault. Let's fire the head coach. It's pretty bizarre what happens sometimes in this league.
It really is. And I want to ask you one more thing about pressure, because I've been a proponent of saying all year that Brady might be under a little bit of pressure to win a Super Bowl outside of New England when he's won all of his Super Bowls with one head coach. Would you read into that?
Well, I think he a certain amount, he probably wanted to prove that he could win somewhere else without Bill Belichick. I think if they would lose to the Chiefs, there's no if anyone makes a negative of that, that's kind of crazy. So I think by getting there, he's shown the world of how he can play. But again, I go back to that game against the Packers. What would the narrative have been for the last week or so had the Packers come all the way back from a 28-10 deficit and won that game after Brady was 7 for 14 for 78 yards with 3 interceptions in the second half? I dare say a lot of people say, oh, well, gee, see that? He doesn't have it anymore. He's lost. How many times have they said that about him and the Patriots over the last 5 years when they'd have a bad game or a bad this or a bad, I don't know. I think it might be time, might be over for him. That's been said quite a few times. I guarantee that would have been the narrative for the last week, but the Packers couldn't get it done thanks to their defense. And then all of a sudden it's all about Tom Brady again. So everybody forgets what he did in the second half. 52 passer rating, by the way, in the second half.
Well, three straight possessions with an interception. I mean, that gets completely lost in all of that. You're celebrating the fact that they won the NFC title, and he threw 3 picks on 3 straight possessions.
Yeah, exactly. And he wasn't that good in the game against New Orleans. I mean, he played. He was okay, but he wasn't great in that game, and we'll never know what would have happened had our good friend from the Rams, Jared Cook, not fumbled when the Saints had a 1-score lead with about 4.5 minutes or so to go in the third quarter, and we're driving toward another score when Cook fumbled. If he'd unfumbled, who knows how different the outcome might have been, but it wasn't. They moved on, but he won that. But Brady wasn't that great in that game either.
No, definitely a beneficiary of the defense. And yes, I think I had to blink about 3 or 4 times to make sure Cook wasn't wearing a Rams uniform when he fumbled that ball, because that was his MO when he was here in St. Louis. And so let's just go ahead and transition into that, because we've kind of beat around the bush enough here. Let's get into the St. Louis Rams aspect. That was something that, when they first were here, they were terrible. I mean, they really were. We had to go through the Tony Banks era. That was not fun. And then all of a sudden, something happened. You had the Trent Green injury, and a little-known guy named Kurt Warner, Packers alum, maybe, not very much of an alum, but Packers alum, Joe. He steps into that role. There was something magical that ended up happening that year. At what point during that season did you step back and go, this kid at the time could be special, and this team could be special?
You could see it pretty quickly because in the first few games of the year, when against a pretty good Baltimore Ravens team in the opener, and it was his first start in the NFL, except for the preseason game that he started after Trent Green got hurt. And he made some big plays in that game, and the Rams won. And then I remember there was a game, I'm trying to remember if the next game was Atlanta or Cincinnati, and they played a lot of teams at the right time. The Falcons had been in the Super Bowl the year before, and their excellent running back, Jamal Anderson, I think, tore his ACL. I believe it was in the first Monday night game of the year, so he wasn't there. Rams won. Then they played the Bengals, and to that point, the Bengals and the Rams were tied for having the most losses in the entire decade. And let's remember, that was the last year of the decade, 1999. And each team had won something like 45 games in the entire decade. Then they beat Cincinnati. But then the game against San Francisco, I'm pretty sure it was the 4th game of the year, was the one. And they had lost to the 49ers 17 consecutive times. And they were the rival. They were the team you had to beat. And they just laid it on them in that game. Isaac Bruce had, I think, 4 touchdowns, 3 in the first half, and they just trounced them. And that was the game where you really open your eyes and say, hey, and that made them 4-0. Hey, this team could really be special. But I can remember guys sitting in the press box and we would, after a touchdown pass where Warner would just go back, boom, 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 here, there. I mean, we'd watch him in practice, and his passes never touched the ground.
Wow.
That's how accurate he was. But when he started doing it in games, I can remember we'd sit there in the press box after a touchdown pass. We just turn our heads and look at the guy next to us and almost just break out laughing, because it was just not that it was funny, that it was just so outrageously unbelievable. And that was what it was. So you could see pretty quickly. And it was after that game, by the way, that Bill Walsh, still was with the 49ers, came into the media, the press conference room where Dick Vermeil was doing his press conference, and told Vermeil, "You guys are good enough to go to the Super Bowl."
Oh, that's
he told Vermeil that then. And so it was magical, and it was pretty incredible. I still have, as I get a little personal here, I still have people come up to me from time to time. In fact, I'll tell this quick story. Was in Phoenix a year ago in the holidays, and we're in the my wife and I are in the airport getting ready to go home, getting ready for our plane, and there's this guy sitting there at the gate who's kind of like looking at me, and I'm saying, I wonder if this guy recognizes me. You never know. I don't know. And so he's looking, and then I'll tell my wife, and I look over, he's looking at me again. Finally, he comes up to me and says, "Are you Howard Balzer?" So I said, yeah. He said, oh man, I thought that might have been you. Just want to let you know I've enjoyed so much listening to you over the years and reading you and all that. I said, well, thanks so much. Then he walks away. That was pretty cool, I said to my wife. 2 minutes later, he comes back to me. He says, and also wanted to tell you, I so enjoyed it that year in '99 when you were burning the sage. And a lot of people, some of the younger group doesn't even know what the heck that meant. But after Trent Green got hurt, a psychic told me to burn sage, to remove the negative energy that was around the team. And I did it every game that year. And so, be that as it may, a lot of people said, do you really think it worked? And so I always say to them, well, prove to me it didn't.
Yeah.
So talk about magical. And you know what? The funny thing about it, I'm watching The Last Dance. And I'd heard about this, but I never knew if it was really true. I'm watching The Last Dance, the Michael Jordan documentary. And they're interviewing Phil Jackson, and behind him there's this credenza or a table or something like that. And if you look really closely, he had sage there on his thing. He used to burn sage. He used to talk to the team about it, and they would do it. So it's I wasn't the only one. Some people thought I was, but Phil Jackson, former head coach of the Bulls, did that too. So others have done it.
You're in great company there, that's for sure. You talk about Trent Green and that injury. Would the Rams have been as good or good at all with Trent Green?
Oh, yeah. Now, would they win the Super Bowl? We'll never know. But that's why everybody was so upset at the time. And if you recall that, they still play it today with when he went down, you see Isaac Bruce sitting over him and just pounding the turf in frustration because he had been so good in the preseason, and you could see that there was just something special about him. And granted, the preseason is the preseason, but he was as accurate as Kurt and was a hell of a player. Now, again, we'll never know. They still would have been a good team, but a lot of people just thought it was over when that happened. In fact, what got me along the line of what I did to seek out a psychic to see if there was something I could do is that there were people in the Rams front office who were saying, this team is cursed. We are cursed. This team is cursed. And if I tell you a quick story with your Blues cap and your Blues stuff there behind you, 2 years ago, after the Blues lost to the San Jose Sharks in the hand pass game, the next day in the paper, Ben Frederickson wrote a column saying the Blues are cursed. Yep. What is it about this? They're just like cursed. Nothing good can happen to them. And as soon as I read that, I got chills. And I said, well, it must be time to pull out the sage again. And guys, I burn the sage before every Blues game. That playoff.
Wow.
All right. Well, you heard it here first then on Crunch Time that it worked in '99 and it worked in 2019. Ooh, there's some symmetry there as well.
Yeah, there is.
Wow. Well, talking about that season, what were your favorite memories of that season? Obviously, Super Bowl victory has to be up there, but I'm sure that there were some smaller moments that maybe made an impact on you specifically. What were some of those moments for you?
There was one great moment, which doesn't have anything to do with on field, where we would go to practice every day, all of us in the media, and there was a wheelbarrow on the side of the field that was painted in Rams colors. And we're going, what in the world is that wheelbarrow? And we didn't know. Well, one day I go to practice, and I hadn't, for whatever reason, I don't remember why, I wasn't at practice the day before. And when I get there, Jim Thomas of the Post-Dispatch comes up to me and says, hey, you missed it. We asked Vermeil yesterday about the wheelbarrow, and he told us about it. So I said, well, what was it? He says, I don't know. We could hardly even figure out what he was saying, which, by the way, he did after the season on the David Letterman show and tried to tell the story, and he just couldn't do it. And so after practice, I went up to Vermeil and I said, hey, I wasn't here yesterday, coach, but they told me you told him the story of the wheelbarrow. Can you tell me? So he starts to, and he says, hold it, man. He says, come with me. Takes me up to his office, opens a little 3-ring binder, which has the daily schedule for the team, flips to a page, opens the rings, and there it is, a little parable that says faith and the wheelbarrow. And he takes it out, goes to the copy machine, makes me a copy, or hands it to the secretary maybe, makes me a copy and says, here. And so I had the whole story right there. I won't go, it was just a cool story about a guy who saw a guy in some place in the mountains somewhere and was like pushing a wheelbarrow on this rope, about 5 feet off the ground. And so he says to him, what are you doing? And so he says, well, I'm practicing. He says, practicing for what? He says, well, I'm going to go in town to this ravine where it's like 2 miles down, and I'm going to push this wheelbarrow across this rope from one side to the other. And he says, do you think I could do it? And he says, no. He says, and so he says, well, I'm telling you, I can do it. So this guy goes back to the townspeople and he says, I'll bet you. He says, I'll bet you I can do it. So So he goes back and starts telling people about it. And he comes back and says, okay, I got some supporters. They say that they believe you can do it. He says, you really believe I can do it? And he says, yeah, I'm going to bet on you. He says, do you really believe I can do it? He says, yeah. He says, okay, get in the wheelbarrow. So he says, it's one thing to believe someone can do it, but it's another thing to get in the wheelbarrow. And I thought that was just a great story. But I'll just always remember that, him handing it to me. The other great moment, I just talked about this with someone the other day for the Super Bowl, is that for the media normally, no one can go to practice in the media because there's just too many people. So they have what's called a pool reporter. One person is assigned by the professional football writers to go to practice, watch the practice, talk to the coach afterward, and then put a little thing together, and it gets distributed to everybody. Who didn't practice? Who was hurt? What did the coach say? Da-da-da-da-da. So since I'm the Rams, and they usually got guys who weren't daily beat guys because they were too busy. And so I was the pool reporter for the Rams. I'll never forget this. It's first practice of the week in Atlanta on a Wednesday. And if anyone remembers, by the end of the week, they had ice storms, and it was just terrible in Atlanta. Not as bad as Dallas was in 2011, but pretty bad. And so earlier in the week, there wasn't precipitation. It was just cold and windy. Well, I go out to practice at the Falcons facility in Suwanee, which was similar to the Rams facility in a way, where it was just big open fields in the back and no trees, nothing else there, just wide open. Well, the wind is whipping through. There's nothing to stop the wind, and it is freezing cold. It is absolutely horrible with the wind. And let's just say I'm not dressed for it. So here I am on the field thinking, oh my God, I'm going to be out here for 2 hours. How am I going to do this? Here comes Dick Vermeil out of the facility, dressed like it was Siberia, with a Rams winter parka and gloves and a hat and the whole bit. And so I go up to him and say, hey, coach, how you doing? And he looks at me, doesn't even say hello. He says, Howard, get your butt, and he didn't say butt, He said, get your butt inside and tell Todd Hewitt, the equipment manager, to give you anything you need to stay warm. So I go inside, and he has this room that has enough winter gear that could have outfit an army. There was so much of it. And I said, oh my goodness, this is amazing. My regret is I didn't ask him for a parka. I probably should have. But he gave me long underwear, gave me gloves, gave me a hat, and I was able to get through because there were still 2 more days in the week. And the best part about it was I had a great pool report to talk about, because I said to him, well, how did you know to bring all this stuff? Because that year there was no extra week between the conference championship games and the Super Bowl. So, they had to get down, everybody had to get down there pretty quickly. So after the games on Sunday. And so I said, how'd you know about this? He says, well, I was looking at the weather report, prior to the weekend, just in case we won this game and we're going to go. And I saw how cold it was supposed to get. So I decided to pack up everything I could. And so that became a big part of my pool report. But the other funny story about that whole season is that you asked when you could know there was something going on there. You could see in training camp that there was something pretty good building in this team. And it wasn't only Trent Green, it was Marshall Faulk, who they had gotten in a trade, and Adam Timmerman had come over as a free agent. And so the Rams had there was a weird schedule because there was an uneven number of teams because the Browns hadn't come into the league yet. And so, or maybe that was the Ravens. Yeah, the expansion Browns hadn't come into the league yet. That made it 32. And so I'm pretty sure that was the way it worked. And so, or maybe it was whatever it was, there was an uneven number of teams. The Rams had a weird preseason schedule. And so I went to Las Vegas for a weekend because my wife at the time, her mom was ill. And so went to Vegas for the weekend. And I knew about a month or so before that, the Rams were like 300-1 or some crazy number to win the Super Bowl and like 150-1 to even get to the Super Bowl. And so I thought to myself, I'm going to go around to some sports books here. And I'm not a big gambler. I don't bet. I said, but if I can find 150 odds just for the Rams to get to the Super Bowl, because the NFC I looked at, I just didn't think it was that good that year. Like I said, the Falcons were a decent team, but they weren't great the previous year. And so I'm going around the sports books. Remember, this is about the 3rd week of preseason games. And they had already it was now 65-1 instead of 150-1. So people were already seeing what was going on and betting it down in terms of the odds of getting to the Super Bowl. And I was going to say, I'll bet $100. I'm not a big bet. Most of the time, if I ever bet, I bet 25. I'll bet $100 on 150-1. Well, I'm going, 65-1? Nah, I'm not going to put 100 on that. It's not enough odds. So when I tell people that story, they say, well, you must regret it. You would have won $6,500 because the Rams got to the Super Bowl. And I said, you know what? If I was sitting in that press box that day for when the Rams played the Buccaneers in the NFC Championship game, and that game was so intense and so close into the very end, if I had known that I had $6,500 riding on that game, I'd have been a basket case. So I was almost glad that I hadn't bet it because I wouldn't have been out of my mind. So, little side story there.
Yeah. So now it's post Super Bowl. Mike Martz is the head coach. What was it like covering Mad Mike?
Mike was an interesting guy to cover, and good guy, pretty good to talk to. He a little paranoid at times. 2 stories on that is, I forget which year this was, but it had to be, let's see, it was after he became head coach. And so he was only head coach, 3 or 4 years. And all of a sudden they come to camp this year, and right across the little road where the Rams facility is, there's a Marriott Residence Inn that had just been built. And Martz is pissed. He says, not only that there's this now hotel right across the street from the practice facility, and it wasn't, it was only like 2 or 3 stories, But he's looking at the very end where there's windows. He says, someone could go in there and watch our practices. And so he's pissed at that, but he's doubly pissed because Stan Kroenke owned the land.
Oh my God.
And he's the one that made the deal for this hotel to be built. So he's really upset. So what he does is he has the maintenance people put these giant poles. It was a little hill there at the one end. He has put these giant poles in the ground and puts this like big green, almost like a tarp, a screen up there that no one could see in. Well, it wasn't that sturdy. And like 3 days in, a storm blew through and blew the screen down. It just blew it off its moorings. And so they say, well, we're not putting this up again. And what they did was they planted some trees. Well, of course, trees don't grow overnight. Well, if you go out there now, and those trees are full, they look gorgeous up there. But the funny thing is, in between the trees, you can still see those poles. the poles are still there. And then the other great March story, the year was 2004. And I had started working for 1380 in town, doing an afternoon show with Malcolm Briggs. But the Rams practiced in the afternoon. So they would allow me, and it was only 2 days a week that the practice interfered, Wednesday and Thursday, because Friday the practice was always earlier. So I'd go to practice. When the show started, I'd walk out and make a quick call in, reporting in, hey, I'm at Rams practice, getting ready to, just setting the scene more than anything. Then go back in, and then afterwards I'd go and do the show, and I'd still be there it was a 3-hour show. I'd still be there for the last hour and a half at least. Well, this starts in training camp when all this is going on, because I think we started in like mid-July with the show. Well, when the season starts, and after about a week or so, this is going on, and all of a sudden comes the announcement that he's closing practice. And most of the Rams coaches, for all the years that I were there, until Spagnuolo, and it wasn't true around the league, allowed practice to be open the whole time, and which was pretty good. Well, now all of a sudden he announces that practice is going to close after like the first 20 minutes of stretching and individual drills, and he won't. But Jim Thomas talked to him, wouldn't say anything about it, just says no, that's what we're going to do. So the next home game, I'm sitting there, and Martin Kilcoyne comes up to me and says, hey, thanks, H. I says, what do you mean, thanks? He says, well, it's the H rule that practice is closed. I says, what are you talking about? Well, I come to find out, no one told me this. I come to find out that Martz was convinced that when I left practice, I was like being a spy and calling the other team and telling them stuff that was going on in practice. That's why I was leaving and going on my cell phone and coming back in.
Oh my gosh.
Honest to God. I said, you're kidding me. No one ever said anything about it. PR guy never came up to me and just asked, hey, Mike wants to know what's going on with your, and I would have just told him, hey, I'm just going on. I'm on the phone for 5 minutes. I'm calling my radio station. And he says, that's all? I said, yeah, all you had to do was ask. And I said I'll never forget, Dwayne Lewis was the PR guy. I said, do you actually, so this was 2004. I'd only been in the business then for 26 years. You think that I'm going to jeopardize what I've done in my career and spy on my own team, or not my own team, but the team I'm covering? Anybody would really think that I would do that? Much less that I would know what was going on anyway. Oh yeah, they're running trips right, left, like here's the plays they're going. I mean, it was so absurd, but that just shows how paranoid he was. But he's not that much different than a lot of coaches.
Well, and then you also had the 2001 Super Bowl with the Patriots and the filming and all that stuff. So, I mean, I guess you could see a little bit of why paranoia would have entered his mind for sure. And it's not like the Patriots stopped cheating after that.
True. But that was the other team doing it. If in fact they did. This is like saying that someone in your own media
Yeah.
is actually doing that. And I guess he never talked to anybody because I was always considered, not always, but I was often considered by some of the fans and listeners a homer, because I would, when everybody, went after Mark Balzer, and I would say, well, he doesn't have an offensive line, or he doesn't have this guy's a pretty good quarterback. He's not Kurt Warner, but he's a pretty good quarterback. Oh, you're just a Rams apologist. You're a Balzer apologist. I said, well, no, I'm just giving balanced reporting. The one year when Balzer was beat to a pulp because the offensive line was so bad. And I mentioned offensive lines earlier in this conversation, where that one year, I think it was the second year of Scott Linehan, when the Rams started 13 different offensive linemen during the season. Now, let's remember, when the season starts, you only have 8 or 9 guys on your active roster that are offensive linemen, and maybe another one on the practice squad. So they were starting guys on the line who they had just signed off the street, because Pace got hurt, Adam Goldberg got hurt, this guy got hurt. I mean, everybody was getting hurt on the line. It was just unbelievable. And so he was getting beat up. And people would be calling whatever show station I was on at the time, and say, well, you have to be creative in your game plan. I said, you can't be creative when you can't protect your quarterback. You can't be creative, And somebody would say, they would say, well, I know they have offensive line issues, but I said, no. When you have offensive line issues to this degree, there's no but. There's no but involved. And so it was just crazy. But anyway, my point being is that for those who thought that of me, and yet here we have a head coach who thought that I was, giving away team secrets to an opposing team.
Jeez. Well, we're getting a lot of that now with the Blues, in a sense of blaming goaltending for the defensive miscues that are going on. But I don't think that's ever going to change here in St. Louis. I don't want to keep you like super long. So if we're running long, just let us know. But before we do end up finishing up, we really want to get into this whole St. Louis, Stan Kroenke, the relocation thing. I really just want to get your gut reaction on what you think might actually come out of the settlement with this lawsuit. I mean, is it going to go to trial? Do we think a settlement's going to come? And if so, could that actually pave the way for another team here in St. Louis?
There's some people who believe it could, and you can never say never. I don't know if the NFL would go to that extent, but there is a big but. I mean, it's hard to imagine that this will go to the trial, because the league and the Rams tried so hard to keep this out of court, because they don't want the stuff that went on behind the scenes becoming public in a courtroom. And they tried to have it go to arbitration. They lost at every level. They were as crazy as our former president taking it to the Supreme Court, like the Supreme Court would even look at it. And so you would think there would be a settlement. But that, of course, begs the question, what would St. Louis agree to settle for? And if they drive a hard bargain, because I felt all along what should have happened in this, right from the get-go, they should have treated it like they treated the Browns when they moved to Baltimore. Now, I'm not going to sit here and say that St. Louis is as iconic an NFL city as Cleveland was with the Browns. But when it comes to business, you do the right thing. There's a reason, obviously, why the NFL forced Stan Kroenke to agree to pay all the attorney's fees if St. Louis sued, because they knew there was a chance, and maybe a good chance, that St. Louis was going to sue, because they knew all the things they had done behind the scenes and how they tried to, quite frankly, a lot of people don't realize this, tried to sabotage the Board of Aldermen vote for the financing of the stadium on 2 occasions. They tried to sabotage that publicly in St. Louis, with someone going on Bernie Miklaus's radio show, then leaking a letter to Dave Peacock the day before the Board of Aldermen full vote. They were hoping the league was hoping the Board of Aldermen wouldn't approve the financing. Then there's no stadium. And they have a clean departure. But they didn't do that. And that led to all the lies that they put in the application for relocation and all those things. So they don't want this becoming public, because they asked for discovery in emails. And I'm still to this day can't believe how brazen and arrogant Kevin Demoff was 2 days after the move was approved to tell Sam Farmer, the previously mentioned Sam Farmer of the LA Times, about the morning in August, about a month after the CVC told the Rams that, no, we're not going to pay for this, pay this $700 million and not even get an extension on the lease. I've heard a lot of people say, well, you should have just done that for $700 million. Really? And only had 10 years left on the lease? That would be insane. And so he sits there and tells Sam Farmer about this morning in August, a month later, where Kroenke calls him from Hollywood Park and says, hey, I drove around this great site for the stadium this morning. It's unbelievable. And Demoff tells Sam Farmer this, that was in 2013, or maybe it was 2012, whatever year it was. It just shows how this was in the works for so long.
Yeah, it was a pretty damning article, and that right there solidified it for a lot of people in St. Louis.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, when he had, it's hard to believe you admit that. Well, now St. Louis sues, and Kroenke's having to pay off. See, I thought all along, guys, that even if the suit went forward, and even if St. Louis would win, well, then they'll just appeal. Well, if they appeal, guess what?
Everything's
coming out. Has to keep paying. At some point, he's going to say, I'm not paying anymore. So to me, what should have happened right from the very start, when you knew that what you were doing is you were doing a town bad, and then making them, and then even throwing them under the bus and allowing, a team to talk about how this city can't support it and the whole bit. What they should have just done is what they did with the Browns. Okay, Stan, you can take the Rams to St. Louis, but we're going to replace that team in St. Louis. However it's going to be done. We're not saying it's going to be right away, but within X number of years, you will get either a team that relocates or an expansion team. And just do that right up front, get it, and then everybody in St. Louis is happy. Everybody's saying, okay, fine. It's a business deal. We're still going to get a team to replace them. But instead, they went about it every which way possible that was wrong and bad, and have just created what could be. I've heard a lot of people say the award could be $200 million. That's chump change.
Oh yeah,
the award could be in the billions when it gets trebled because you can show fraud and things like that. So what would St. Louis accept as a settlement if they just say, hey, we're not settling unless we get a team? So a lot of people don't think that can happen because they don't trust the NFL. Well, you know what? If they promise to give you a team and that's part of a court settlement, it's pretty hard to go back on that. And then you say, give us a team, and then instead of the money, which you would have had to pay us, you can build the stadium.
Yep.
You can build the stadium. So we'll see. I don't know.
Yeah, I hope we do end up, the St. Louis does getting another team. I mean, you saw with the Battlehawks and everything else, so we'll have to see. But are there any comparisons, Howard, to the Bidwell move to the Kroenke move?
Not really, because Bidwell wanted to stay, and he was in tears on a couple of occasions when he was being interviewed about leaving. He didn't want to leave. Michael Bidwell, who now, of course, runs the Cardinals, has talked about it, how the family didn't want to leave St. Louis. And the only somewhat similar, to a degree, and I won't even know if it's a similarity, because back in the day, if Michael Bidwell had been the guy running the team back then, and of course he couldn't because he was like a young kid, maybe not a kid, maybe he was in college, I don't remember exact age, whatever it was. But if Michael Bidwell, I mean, heck, the unbelievable thing about that move was that the league approved it without a promise for a stadium.
Wow.
They played at Arizona State for almost 20 years. And it was Michael Bidwell, who had taken over pretty much the operation of the team back then, who got the deal done and did all the politicking and did all the things you have to do behind the scenes. And it was still a very close vote that got the stadium financing passed. But he was a big part of how and why that got done. So I've always said if he had been running the Cardinals, it might have been different, because Bill didn't run in those circles. He wasn't part of the power elite in St. Louis. He didn't have the personality to interact with those guys. He just said, we need a new stadium. and then just sat back. And there still might have been a stadium if the city hadn't intervened when Gene McNary had the plans for a stadium out in the county in our city. And then all of a sudden the city said, "Oh, this is serious. We can't have the team leave the city proper." And so they got in and messed the whole thing up. And then they put together some kind of, harebrained plan that they, at the league meeting, which was here in Arizona, ironically, 1988, I'm pretty sure is the year, where Chuck Knight, then of, was it Union Electric then, I think, and William Cornelius, I forget the name of the company he was with. They were all part of, that, what do they call it then? Oh, gosh. Oh. Civic Progress. Yeah. I always used to call it Civic Regress. But they came and made a presentation to the NFL owners at the league meeting, and they contradicted each other in front of the owners of what the deal was. So any chance they had at that point of getting the league to, because who knows, maybe they would have had a chance if they had come in with a real plan that made sense, because they were approving a deal where a team was going to go, didn't even have a new stadium promised in the city they were moving. And they just botched the presentation, which the Post-Dispatch at the time didn't even report on. Knight and Cornelius came into a little room after it, and I happened to witness it along with the business reporter for the Post-Dispatch at the time. We both witnessed each of them, one of them mother effing the other, saying, "Don't you ever mother effing contradict me again in front. Don't you ever," he was calling him an MFer. It was unbelievable. I couldn't believe I was witnessing this, and they were doing it in front of people. And then I got the story and wrote it in the Riverfront Times, of all places, a week later of what happened, and the Post-Dispatch never ran it. They never reported the argument or anything that happened. Pretty unbelievable.
That's crazy. Well, you talk about the Bidwells not wanting to leave St. Louis. I mean, after the Rams left, Michael Bidwell has done a lot of stuff to kind of fill the void of what the Rams are doing, especially with like the high schools and the scholarships and stuff like that. So it definitely does show they do have ties to St. Louis, and they really did miss leaving the city. Yeah.
When every year when they would come to the Rams game when they played here, Bidwell would get together with all the former players that still lived in St. Louis, whether it was Dan Deerdorf, Gus Otto, Johnny Rowland, you name it. He would get together with them, host them in his box, take them to dinner the night before. He did that every year when the Cardinals came to town to play the Rams.
That's awesome. Well, you've kind of come full circle as far as your career is concerned. I mean, you got to cover the St. Louis Football Cardinals here. You cover the Rams. Now you're in Arizona covering the Cardinals. Talk a little bit about how that came about and really what you're doing now with Arizona.
Well, once the Rams left, and my wife and I started, and I had a son who moved here in 2014. And then we started maybe looking and saying, well, it's kind of weird covering the NFL and doing all this, and there's not a team in this city for the second time in my career. And so, we're we're a little older now, obviously. And so we said, maybe, so we started looking at some other places. Then another younger son moved here 2.5 years ago. And so that got us looking a lot closer at Phoenix. We had always thought about it, but got us looking even closer for it. And then this opportunity at sportsillustrated.com came along, where they have websites for all the NFL teams, and you're essentially your own publisher. And so the opportunity came along, and we said, hey, why not? Of course, I signed the contract 2 weeks before the pandemic hit. And so when that occurred, I was covering the team from March through August remotely. And it wasn't that bad, because I had the same access that everybody living here had, because all the interviews were on Zoom. And that was the way it was going to be for the regular season. Theoretically, I could have stayed there. I could have stayed in St. Louis and still continued doing it. But I thought it was important to be there. I was still able to go to practice, was able to go to home games, even though we couldn't do interviews there. But I thought it was just important covering the team to, be a part of the community. So it's been great. I'm looking out the window here, and it's another 72-degree day.
Ouch.
On February 1st. And not having to worry about ice and snow and wondering, is this storm coming? Is that storm coming? It's been neat. It's been an upheaval, because I always promised myself, and I always said, I will never move during the football season. And I didn't want to. We were hoping to move in like June or July in kind of the off time, but we didn't know what the NFL was going to do.
Yep.
And so then all of a sudden the NFL says, okay, yeah, I said, oh my goodness, we got a lot to do here and getting the house ready to sell and all that. So essentially we had to move twice because we moved in early September to get here and do everything we had to do in the house. And of course, when you're shedding things in your house, but the places who pick up stuff that you want to donate to won't even come because of the pandemic, that affected it. And so then we stayed with one of my sons for longer than we wanted to. And so then had to move again when we found a place to live. So it was a little bit of an upheaval, but settled in now. Things are a little calm and, just getting ready for another off season and see where it goes in the NFL. But it's miss St. Louis certainly, but it's great being here. And then my third son, who was still back in St. Louis, he moved also in the beginning of December. So all three of my sons are here, and one of my ex-wives. So it's like a big family again.
That's awesome. So Larry Fitzgerald is another future Hall of Famer, and is an incredible human being. We all know this. But what's it like being in close personal contact with him?
Well, one of the things about it that this was very hard is that the only quote close personal contact was, him standing, like 20 feet away during stretching drills during practice or in the passing drills. I never met, I still haven't even met,
oh man, personally
with the head coach. Never even to go up and say, hey, just introduce myself. It was just so different. Obviously we couldn't get in locker rooms, couldn't develop any of those relationships that are so important when you're covering a team. All you're getting is what they give you in the Zoom interviews. And so it was cool seeing him and all that and seeing him on those practice days. But in terms of, a personal relationship, there really hasn't been because of the whole pandemic and the way it's being done.
Oh, that's terrible. Because just listening to his interviews, he seems like a guy that you would like instantly connect with, and maybe sit down, and he'd be the guy that you want to have a beer with.
Yeah,
he's such
totally.
a great guy.
Yeah, I know his father pretty well, who of course is still a journalist in the Minneapolis area, and so I was looking forward to meeting him and a lot of the different people. But hopefully that'll change in the weeks and months ahead.
Yeah, that's the big hope, definitely. One final thing I kind of want to ask, because you brought up Bernie Miklasz, and St. Louis has been blessed with so many just incredible journalists, reporters, all of that, and it got me thinking about Brian Burwell, and I know you guys probably had a very close relationship. Just talk a little bit about that relationship and what he meant to football here in St. Louis.
Yeah, he meant a lot. I remember when he wrote the first story about the stadium plans. I think they with Dave Peacock and everybody, because that was announced in January of 2015. And I remember he wrote in like September or October, kind of didn't tell it all that he knew, but told enough to say that this task force is coming together and, they're going to do these things. And he was right up front. In fact, I remember on the anniversary of his passing several months ago that I think it was either in I forget where I read, maybe in Post-Dispatch, or someone posted a story he had written about the whole Rams move and giving everybody, hey, we got to understand what's happening here. Because I can remember, guys, when Bernie was writing a lot back in the day and was calling people Chicken Littles who were worried about the Rams leaving. Oh, Roger Goodell wants his team to stay here. They've never been able to build a stadium. And I remember I hated to be right about this, but I can remember talking to people at Rams Park and different people at the time and saying, the one wild card in all this with Kroenke, if he wants to move the team, is that he could build the stadium himself. And like hardly anybody was even entertaining that thought. But I remember saying that to people. And so, but Brian was one of those guys who understood, what was truly possible with this and how you can't trust, certain people. And so if people like look in the archives, I can probably find some of those columns. So yeah, he was a straight shooter, obviously, and it was a tough loss when that happened.
That certainly was. And Joe, you got one more?
I got one more for you, and it's basically your prediction for this Super Bowl. I mean, who do you got, and how close of a game will this be?
I think it'll probably be close. I'm going to go with the Chiefs. I guess you got to stay with the Missouri team. I'd like to see them win 2 in a row. Certainly, I think it could be a toss-up. My one hesitation is that offensive line. They're going to be working a lot on that over this next week or so of how they're going to try to control those pass rushers. Sometimes that means keeping an extra guy in to block. But if you keep an extra guy in, then you don't have as many receivers out in the field. So I think the Chiefs are overall the better team. And so I'm going to say they're going to win. But would I be surprised if Tampa Bay did? No, because, hey, one day, one game. It's like Tony La Russa always used to say. And it gets me sometimes when people kind of be negative about teams that don't win in the postseason, as if that's easy to do. It's like Tony La Russa said all the time. He says, the hardest thing to do is make the postseason. After that, anything can happen because you're playing the best. You're playing the best teams. And that's certainly the case here, as it normally is in the Super Bowl. Whoever just plays the best that day is going to be the one that wins. So hopefully it'll be as good a game as we all think it will be.
Yeah, we hope for that as well. So Howard Balzer joining us. Tell us where people can find your work. I mean, I always read you in the Post-Dispatch, so I like the physical copies, but I know you're doing work online now. But tell people where they can find your stuff.
SI.com/NFL/Cardinals. And I have 2 guys from Arizona State who helped me with a lot of the content. And so they've been great and helped us build the site from was hardly anything when we took it over. So that's a place. You can also, I do a show on Sirius each week on the NFL Channel 88, a Pro Football Hall of Fame radio show. That's normally on Thursday nights late around 11 p.m. Central Time. And then they run it a couple times on Saturday. So do that for them on a weekly basis. And so that's where people can read me and find me.
Oh, that's awesome. We had a whole bunch more questions, but I know we're already at an hour and a half and we don't want to take up all of your time, but seriously, thank you for joining us. A lot of great insight and really just a nice trip back down memory lane for us as well.
I enjoyed it. Always enjoyed talking about present, past, and whatever. And it's always good to reminisce and tell some of those stories you don't get to talk about too often.
Very, very true. Howard Balzer, thank you once again for joining us. Hopefully we can do this again very, very soon and enjoy the weather in Arizona.
I will do that until it gets to be July, I'm sure.
Awesome. Well, that was Howard Balzer once again, formerly of St. Louis, covering the Rams, the Cardinals, and now covering the Arizona Cardinals. Just a great conversation, a lot of great insight, and we could not be more thankful to have him on. And like I said at the top of this, in our minds, he's an NFL legend. No question whatsoever. So, Joe, anything else you can think of that you want to hit today before we head out?
No, that was a fun interview. That was something that I couldn't wait for when this was announced. Like when you wrote it in our group chat, like this is definitely happening. I'm like, this is going to be fun. So I can chalk one off of my bucket list in terms of interviews. There are a lot more, but that's one big one right there.
Yeah, it certainly was. Like I said, I remember sitting down every Sunday morning, grabbing the paper, getting the sports section, and reading his columns leading into those football games, because it definitely got me ready to go. If you guys want to hear this interview, if you didn't get a chance to catch it in its entirety, make sure you listen to our podcast wherever you can find podcast, iTunes, Spotify, all of that. And you can also find it here on Facebook as well. Unfortunately, Scott was not able to join us. We're having some technical difficulties. We're still working on that. So we're hoping to have him back by tonight for the nightly show. That'll come at you at 9:00 here on Crunch Time. And don't forget to check out our radio show on Sundays from 9 to 11. We'll probably have some snippets of this interview in there as well, so you can catch that on KYRO. For Joe, for Scott, for Howard Balzer, I am Wags. Thank you for joining us, and have a great rest of your Monday. go!